Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. Very glad that you're here to have a little presentation about the CHSE application process, the structured portfolio, just to help all of you, hopefully, who are going to be applying. My name is Andrew Spain. I am the Director of Certification for the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. That is a salaried position just by means of full disclosure, but there's no super secret side thing based on volume or anything like that, just by means of full disclosure. The intent of this is to obviously help you understand what the portfolio is all about. And again, it's a structured portfolio, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at each part of the structured portfolio, hopefully help you gain some insight into how you're going to demonstrate your performance as an advanced educator. We'll look at some of the potentially confusing items based on previous application cycles. We obviously work each time to try and make the information more clear, but sometimes, of course, there's still questions that may remain. We'll have a few tips towards the end, hopefully help you with putting your structured portfolio together, and then we'll take your questions at the end. Biggest things to keep in mind when you're putting together your structured portfolio is to make sure you understand what is different between a CHSE-A as compared to a CHSE. Each of you who has achieved CHSE is familiar with the examination, not probably something that is everyone's favorite, but that is how we worked with our 2-year competency level. That's what the CHSE is targeted towards. And so the items on the exam are all written at that 2-year competency level as determined by the practice analysis. To move to become a CHSE-A, through your portfolio submission, we are looking for you to demonstrate that you have had an ongoing involvement in healthcare simulation, of course, but critical to it is to understand that you need an impact beyond your own institution. And there's lots of ways to have that. It could be through things like conference presentations, regional work. It could be work within your particular profession. Perhaps you made a significant impact in the nursing simulation sector, paramedic simulation sector, whatever it may be. And so we're looking again at those impact beyond where you just come in and do your daily work. And so it's important to understand that as well. Some of you may have the opportunity to work in a larger system. And so impact would also count if you have a multiple organization site, has multiple sites over a larger region, multiple states, multiple countries, perhaps, depending on where you're applying. That would also count as impact as well, because we would obviously see that you're having a much broader reach than just your home institution. Again, the one where you would normally work on a day-to-day basis. Leadership is an important component as well. So there's loads of things that make up being a good leader, of course, anything from advocacy to mentorship to things like the impact that we were previously talking about, because of course it's not just about coming in and doing your daily work. It's actually about stepping up and bringing up those behind you who are earlier in their career through your leadership, helping to grow healthcare simulation. Again, some of those concepts like that, and of course specifically to healthcare simulation education. And of course, we must know that you're more advanced in your skills as a healthcare simulation educator as well. So that's kind of the things that are going to differentiate you as a CHSE-A compared to a CHSE. And so keep these things in the back of your mind as you're going through and putting your structured portfolio together, because you definitely want to address any questions that the reviewers may have. How are you an advanced educator? How are you making an impact? How are you demonstrating leadership? And the more clearly you can answer that and demonstrate those things through your structured portfolio, the easier it will be for the reviewers to take a look at all the wonderful things that you've submitted and make that designation to say, yes, I'm voting on this person to be put forward as a CHSE-A. So that's your sort of 3 fundamental areas that we're looking for from an overall perspective. Now, I list this as step 1. But I would encourage you to sort of think as step pre-1 is make sure you understand why you are applying to become a CHSE-A. Perhaps it's to get recognition at your own institution. If you're one of the lucky ones that gets an increase in salary, that's fabulous, of course. That's a great reason why. Some of you are looking just to expand your career, develop professionally. Those are wonderful reasons as well. The recognition as a CHSE-A is, of course, high up on a lot of people's lists, but definitely identify your own why. So that way, when you are putting together your structured portfolio, and remembering that these things often take 20 to 30 hours to put together with the narrative responses and so forth, that you have some drive to get this done before the application deadline on September 1. But here's your eligibility criteria. Once you've identified your why, you have to be currently a CHSE-A. Of course, you're going to be in healthcare simulation, putting items, educational activities, simulation activities together for those who are in healthcare. Either they're becoming licensed or they are already licensed. All is good. For the CHSE-A, it is required to have a master's degree or equivalent combination of education and experience. I mentioned the 5 years of experience, and that's a minimum criteria. Again, if all you've done is come into your workplace and do great stuff there, but haven't moved on to being able to make more of an impact outside your organization, you may not quite be ready for CHSE-A yet, but we'll certainly hopefully help you get targeted to the right direction. So when you've started to make more of that impact, demonstrated more of the leadership, then you'll be ready. But that's the minimum that we're looking at. And of course, the education expertise in healthcare simulation activities and settings is another one of the eligibility criteria for applying. I mentioned this before, that again, it's critical to remember that you must go above and beyond just coming in and doing your job. Unless you're one of the lucky few that has a job that it includes leadership and impact and all these other things. Most of us don't have that written into a job description because our organizations typically are worried about, what are you going to do for us? What are you going to do at our home institution? So you've got to take those extra steps and go beyond. So please keep that in mind. Again, when you're looking at the eligibility and determining whether you're ready, and you may not discover it until you're going through and marrying up your information, all your accomplishments, and looking at the standards and suggested evidence. But that's definitely where we would want to start next. Once you've met the eligibility criteria, is to pull that off of our website. It's free for download, and it has all the standards that are suggested. Note that all of the items on there are not mandatory in the suggested evidence. They are listed both at the CHSE level, that 2-year competency level, as well as the 5-year expected performance level. And all they are is suggested activities for that particular standard. You may have different things that you're doing, but they fit into one of not only these 4 domains that are listed, but each of the standards in each of the domains. And so you're just going to be looking at those things as sort of, this is what's been put together for that level of performance at the 5-year level. And here's the other thing. You don't have to do every single one of the standards at the 5-year plus level. Some of you may not have had an opportunity to expand all the way into that 5-year level of performance for each standard. Others, you may have well exceeded that. You're perhaps at what would be roughly the 8, 10, 12-year level of performance in that particular standard. So the overall thing that the reviewers are looking for is, do you have, in general, that 5-year gestalt? And again, looking at that, again, it's an overall sense of what your performance has been as an educator, a leader, and the impact that you've made through those activities and functions. So the next piece, of course, once you're looking at that and writing notes down, and you definitely want to write notes down as you're going through the standards and suggested evidence, because that will help you with compiling your application, because you'll be able to address that either in your CV, in your narrative statements, or even through your exemplar that you submit. And of course, you could even ask your references to perhaps identify some of those things as well. It just, again, is going to give the reviewers a wonderful insight and information into all the great things that you do. And as you're tying it back to that standards and suggested evidence document, the language should hopefully tie it together and make it easier for the reviewers. There's 6 sections or items in the application. You'll see also on our website, there's an application information document, and that sort of lists the full descriptor for all of the different items. And then there's a little bit of a stripped down worksheet, which is just a simple Word document where you can actually start entering your responses as needed, your narrative responses. You can make notes in there about what you want to make sure you address, whatever it might be. But we put those documents together to help you with actually understanding the process, and also to help pull things together as you're going through it. So again, when you see those items on our webpage, that's why they are there. For the submission of your application, there's the online application that has a number of the elements, such again, as I mentioned, the narrative questions, some information related to your exemplar would be in there. It's sometimes even things like, of course, where you work, a little description of your work site, so the reviewers have an understanding of what your system is looking like, especially for the larger organizations. And there's also, you're going to work with me to set up a Dropbox, or alternative, if your institution doesn't allow for Dropbox, because the documents you'll submit for your exemplar activity are often quite large, especially if they include videos, whatever it might be. And so we have to be able to capture those a different way. And so that's actually part of the submission, but we'll revisit that towards the end as well, just to make sure it's clear. But step 3, of course, is to complete your application. This is that application worksheet that I was mentioning, and you can see it sort of has some basic instructions as you're looking through it. It's a multiple page document, links in there to make sure you're getting the right documents or pieces of information that's needed. You can see it again, this isn't the whole thing, but it starts to get into the narrative responses and so forth. But we'll address each one of the components of the portfolio as we're going through now. So your professional information and eligibility confirmation is what starts off your online application. Fairly straightforward stuff, things like what your credentials are, do you meet the eligibility criteria, a verification that you're going to aspire to the healthcare simulationist code of ethics. Very straightforward stuff. And then you're going to go into the narrative responses, which are going to take a little more work now, and you'll definitely want to refer to the application information sheet. The online application itself also has some of the information there. If you click on the little information icon that's there, they're a little small sometimes, but it has some of the same information to help. But what you'll see with the narrative responses is that you're going to address through your narratives your performance, your demonstrated performance in each of the domains. And there's guiding questions for each of the domains that the committee has put together to help you with answering those. And if you're able to well address each of those questions as part of your narrative response, that typically is going to be sufficient, because they're looking for the narrative response related to that standards and suggested evidence document. And so those higher level questions for each domain are to help cull all those standards into sort of grouped areas. And if you're responding to those questions, those sub questions for each domain, you're going to be well placed to be able to have a nice narrative as well. I would certainly encourage you, especially in the 3rd and 4th domain related to designing and developing, as well as implementing and evaluating simulation activities, that you refer to your exemplar, because your exemplar is going to be a submission of one of your simulation activities that you have designed and implemented, as well as modified over time. And so it's a great way to tie things together and not have to repeat what is already in your exemplar. I would also encourage you not to repeat what is in your CV or resume. And again, that's one of the next pieces that you're going to have, which we'll discuss here. But you want to build on that. Go a little bit deeper into what is on your CV or resume that you can describe to the reviewers. You don't have to state that you've done all kinds of presentations or things like this, but you could certainly address how that has helped you grow as a leader, how that's helped you distribute information, and made an impact, frankly. And so those are the kinds of things that you might consider as you're going through the narrative responses. Again, building on what you're already putting in your CV or your exemplar. Now, I mentioned those guiding questions. I've got a couple of the domains listed here, and you can see that it's fairly straightforward. You can see how they tie together in the domains. All 4 domains, of course, are listed in that application information sheet with all of their guiding questions. You can certainly go beyond these guiding questions, but if you're addressing each of these, again, your narrative responses are going to be very strong and hopefully very clear for the reviewers as well, as they refer back to that standards and suggested evidence, help the reviewers understand how you're performing at that 5-year and beyond level. So again, that's just an example of what we have on an application information sheet. I mentioned that exemplar activity a couple times. That's your section 3 for your structured portfolio. And again, the reason when we went to a structured portfolio is that when they're unstructured, it makes it difficult for the applicant to know exactly what to put in. And also that means the reviewers are having to adapt to every single applicant and try and understand what it is they've submitted. So the structured portfolio gives us these concrete want something here, something here, something here, that each applicant is having to build, submit, and then have reviewed. And it helps with the consistency, and hopefully it will be very sensible to you all as applicants to know what you're putting in as well. For the simulation activity, it can be a number of different things. It could be a natural educational activity. It could be a research activity. There's a whole range of things that could be there. We typically, of course, are going to see educational activities, but we've made sure it's a little more generic and not strictly, just the educational item for some of you who have done different pieces. Some of you may have already actually moved on to a higher level or higher role as an administrator. And so you could actually be educating the educators through simulation. That would be a great activity to submit. Perhaps you're leading research activities and it's a different focus for your simulation activity. Again, a wonderful opportunity to submit some of the great things that you're doing. It's important to understand that this is a completed item, not something that's in development, because one of the things when you look at the documents, you'll see that we're expecting you as an educator, an advanced educator, to be able to respond to the data that you have coming back out of your simulation activity. It could be learner evaluations, it could be feedback from your fellow simulationists who've put on the event, put on that activity, and they're giving you some feedback where some things perhaps need to be improved. Perhaps you tried to evolve it a little bit because you didn't like something from the first go round that you had. And so again, having something that has some history behind it is kind of important because that's going to help you show that full range of activities. Because as an educator, we don't only design things, we respond to them and we improve them over time to make them better experiences for our learners and our participants in the simulation. So if you choose to do something that's still in development or actually hasn't been launched yet, you're really being a little risky there because frankly, the reviewers can't see your full range of advanced educational expertise. And so just keep that in mind. We are looking for something that's either comprehensive and or complex. And it can be actually a simple thing, something like a task trainer or something like that you've designed, but it becomes complex if you're showing that you're responding to things like perhaps low intubation rates or poor IV start success rates and things like that. And if you're showing how it's a complex organizational type approach and you're expanding across time and geography to expand it out to different hospitals, different healthcare settings, and improving all of that, getting the feedback, adjusting the program, making sure that those rates are going up, that would actually be a great example of something that is quite complex, even though the particular thing that is being simulated could be quite small. So I just want to make sure that you don't feel like, oh my gosh, it has to be all about full arrests on a fully programmable mannequin, something that's crazy like that. It could be something related to disaster response at your healthcare institution. It could be, again, a big IPE activity in an academic setting where you're getting a lot of different students together from different backgrounds. Loads and loads of opportunities there. Don't restrict yourself to thinking it has to be just in one particular area or one particular aspect, things like that. But you are looking for something that's more comprehensive or complex, because this is a great way to be able to show your advanced educational skills to the reviewers. And so you want to have that more complex and or comprehensive type activity so they can see that you're not just doing the very simple level early entry, early learner kind of activities, but you're moving on and have that full range of skills as an advanced educator, from needs assessment all the way through to integration of evaluation data into your course improvement. The overview of the activity is entered into the online application. It'll ask you some broad questions there to give some insight to the reviewers so they can see what it is that you're submitting in your exemplar. I mentioned before how you can cross-reference some of your narrative responses to capture some of your performance as an advanced educator, leader, the kind of impact you've had through your exemplar activity, again, depending on what it is that you're submitting. I mentioned before about submitting to Dropbox or as arranged. The Dropbox items, I should mention again, can be quite full in terms of the range. It can be evaluation data, it can be the whatever document that you have utilized. for designing it. It can be your needs assessment tools. It can be your videos of learners. Again, all these things are kept confidential. We don't share them with anybody except the reviewers. If you're concerned about any privacy items or things like that, we can certainly have a chat about that, because we are not asking you to breach those, of course, but we certainly want to give you the opportunity to submit what is appropriate and helps the reviewers understand that comprehensive and complex project that you've had hopefully a great time putting on and learned a great deal, and of course even improved other activities that you developed since then. Section number 4 is submitting your simulation specific CV or resume. And when we talk about a simulation specific one, you have probably, for many of you anyway, many job and or education or other activities that are fabulous, frankly, but if they aren't related to simulation or simulation related type items, things like healthcare and so forth, all that does is create a lot of noise for the reviewers to have to go through. It's okay. It's great if my first job was as a paper carrier. How on earth does that help me become demonstrate that I'm a great CHSE-A? If there's something in there that turned out to make me a great healthcare simulation educator, I suppose I would put it in, but I can't make that connection. So you would remove that from this specific submission and focus on those things that are going to help clearly demonstrate your impact, your leadership, and your advanced educational skills again. And so you can see there's some suggestions here. They're certainly by no means the only things you would put in a CV or resume that's simulation specific, but hopefully that gives you a good start. Many of you perhaps already have a longer CV/resume put together. So you can either highlight it through just again doing the yellow highlights on a Word document or something like that, whatever is easiest, or if you just want to create one and then just remove the extraneous items. So you have just that specific one with just the information that's needed. Either option is appropriate, and it just needs to be clear for the reviewers. We're going to ask you to submit 2 references. Now, this is not going out to them and asking them to put together a letter. So it's important to understand this. You're going to actually send them a link to a form. You can go look at the form itself. There's information in the handbook as to what is in the form, but we're asking them to score you based on your performance as an advanced educator, as listed in the domains. And so they're going to give you those Likert scores. And then we're going to ask them on that form to give insight as to why they scored you that way. So why are they scoring you with all 4s for your leadership and professional development domain, for example? And so hopefully, and you can certainly help your references understand what we're looking for, but they should be giving insight into how you're an amazing leader, the advocacy activities you've done, how you've made an impact. Why are you such a great educator when you're looking at domains 3 and 4 in terms of designing and implementing things? Hopefully they can give great information like, well, this applicant, again, I don't want to give any names to make it more confusing, but this applicant has taken our nursing program where we only had a half dozen simulation activities. We now have over 40 highly designed and delivered with improvements type activities. This person has been responsible for that. What a wonderful insight from that reference to show how you've made a difference. And again, that's the kind of thing that we're looking for the references is to give us, is that insight specific to the domains and all the suggested evidence in there. So again, give the reviewers that understanding from their perspective of the references, so that it just links all those things together that you've already been submitting. The submissions do come directly to us, so you won't see those unless the reference themselves wants to share those with you, but that's up to them. Quick note there, we strongly suggest you do not have someone else who is applying at the same time make one of your references. And of course, the other thing is to make sure that you are picking references who do have a great deal of insight into your simulation capabilities as a whole. So make sure you're choosing wisely. We do expect the references to be submitted by the deadline as well. So you may have to work with those individuals to get that in. Of course, as you're submitting items, I'll be giving you updates as to your progress and if we have received those references yet. Last section is just the fee that has to be submitted. You can see the rates there. It's $150 for SSH members or members of organizations that support the CHSE-A, and there's 14 of them now, by the way. So quite a few organizations support our certifications. Couple of notes related to it. CHSE-A assumes your current CHSE expiration date, no matter what that is. So if you've got 3 years left, 2 years left, 4 days left, it's going to assume that expiration date. So you may have to consider doing your CHSE renewal while the review process is going on. Again, I'll work with you as the information is coming in to make sure we're understanding exactly your situation and what other steps need to be done. And the other piece of information is if you're awarded the CHSE-A, that supersedes the CHSE credential, and you'll only use the one now, the CHSE-A. So it's not like a double certification now. It's basically stepping up, and you're now at that advanced level from here on out. Application timelines, we take them on March 1 and September 1, and then you'll see that there's roughly a 2-month turnaround for each of those for the notifications to be made for the applicant. And again, those decisions. When we look at the review process to make those decisions, we do have 2 reviewers that are assigned to each of you. And they're going to basically go through and independently look at the information and make an overall determination, yes, no, or unsure. And they're looking at that overall gestalt. What is it that you have actually been able to pull off as, again, an advanced educator? And so they're going to sit back, reflect on the standards and suggested evidence, and make a final recommendation somewhere along the line for yes, no, or unsure. If we have 2 yeses or 2 nos, then we typically do not assign a 3rd reviewer. If we have split results or a couple of unsure, or whatever that looks like, we'll assign a 3rd reviewer. And we also typically have a review panel to especially review anyone that has either split votes or double no votes. We don't typically review the double yes, because it's, again, if you've submitted a great portfolio and it's clear to the first 2 reviewers, there's not a lot of need to go back unless we just want to double check and cross-reference for the reliability of our review process. So everyone can see, well, why did these over here get 2 yes reviews? And that way we make sure we're consistent in our review process. But again, 2 reviewers with a possible 3rd, and the review panel to make sure that we're fully assessing as best we can every single application that comes in and give everybody a very fair chance to actually achieve the CHSE-A credential. A few tips here. We want you to be able to show off your SIMpertise. It's a coin phrase, of course, but the idea is you do a lot of wonderful things. Use the structured portfolio to actually capture those. That's really the goal that we're looking for there. So just think about that in the back of your brain when you're going back to, how do I show off I'm an advanced educator? How do I show off my leadership? How do I show off my impact? Just don't be afraid to do that. That's sometimes tough for us. If you've ever, I imagine most of you actually have had to put together a quick, this is who I am for conference introductions. And it's difficult for us to write those things. There's a lot of, I did this, I accomplished this, and those are difficult to write. We're now asking you to put the whole structured portfolio together, which basically says, look at the amazing work that I did. And that's tough for us. Don't be afraid to show it off. We're not asking you to fluff it up or do anything crazy. Just state the facts, show your part in it, all these kinds of things. I certainly encourage you to write everything that you submit. Look, it's got to be professional and free of errors, because that unfortunately gives us an indication that perhaps you didn't spend the time that was needed. And is that really evidence of a high level professional that's going to be granted this very prestigious certification? So don't have something like that trip up the reviewers. Certainly keep in mind the standards and suggested evidence as you're going through. Don't forget to have that application information sheet so you're addressing all of the items. Lots of time to complete this. We know that it takes anywhere from 20 to 40 hours to put together a good structured portfolio. So don't try and cram it together on the very last couple of days, because it may end up that your portfolio just isn't ready. And unfortunately, that shows through to the reviewers when they're looking at other submissions that are often absolutely wonderful. So we want you to really put in that best work. And of course, that includes your exemplar. What's one of your best exemplars is a simulation activity that again shows off your great work. Feel free to have, of course, someone read your answers and look at your portfolio before you submit it. We actually suggest that you have them look at your advanced education, with the lenses of, are you showing off your advanced education capabilities? Are you showing your leadership? Are you showing your impact? So just, again, keep those things in mind when you're going through and putting together your portfolio as you tie them back to the standards and suggested evidence. A couple other things: be explicit and clear. Clarity obviously is more important than quantity, and it's important here, especially with your CV / resume, that you're making sure that your role is clear. Even some things like you're listing all your conference presentations, don't be afraid to put in exactly what your part of that was. It doesn't have to be a long piece of information, but just something like, you were the panel lead, you were the primary author and one of the panel members, whatever it might be. It was a solo presentation on a podium or a full plenary. Again, any of those pieces of information that help the reviewers understand your particular role for each of the items on your CV or resume. And obviously to see your progression, because presumably your earlier presentations, you might have just been a panel member with something that someone who was your mentor probably put together. But as you go through over years, your role is going to change and you're going to become more advanced. That's a normal progression. And we're hoping to see that with everything that you have placed in there. Make sure that your leadership contributions are easy to understand, because if you don't state things specifically, that leaves the reviewers guessing. And we certainly don't want to have that as well. That's the fewer gaps there are, the better. Sticking points, I mentioned that Gestalt, but all three areas, that leadership, the impact, and the simulation educator expertise, try again, be as clear as possible. When the submissions aren't as complete or professional, sometimes that does create some challenges for the reviewers. And we're looking for evidence to support all your statements. We've trained our reviewers to take that positive approach to, okay, looking for all the things that just help add to that overwhelming evidence to grant you the CHSE-A. They're not looking to tear you down and find the ways you're not that way. They're looking to add. So think of all the positive things that you can put in there that they can see, oh, they've done this, they've done this. Look at all the wonderful things over here. Oh, wow, a different piece over here where they were serving for an organization and led a committee to do this and that. Because if you just list a committee membership for SSH or INAXL or SESM or whoever it is, that doesn't tell the reviewers a whole lot. But if you go and add the clarity to say, on this committee, I led a number of working groups where we created new forms, we updated processes, we helped get this accomplished. It again clearly demonstrates your role, and it's not just a piece on your CV or resume that just says I was on a committee, but leaves the reviewers wondering, what did you actually do on that committee? And that's, again, just a very concrete example of the types of things that will help your structured portfolio be stronger. Make sure you follow all directions. Sometimes that will end up where we miss deadlines and things like that. And we certainly don't want to have to push you back into the next applications cycle just because there was something that was overlooked, a missed item, those sorts of things. And don't forget all the details for your exemplar. You can certainly add a cover sheet to describe each of the items that you're submitting as well, if you think that will make it helpful for the reviewers. And especially when we're looking at things like videos or photos or things like that, that they're wonderful documents, items to submit, but why did you submit them? So giving some clarity into why each item was submitted can often be very useful for the reviewers as well. Again, I've probably gone over this many times, but just show off everything that you're doing as an amazing healthcare simulation educator. And just have all the items in your mind when you're going through and building all of your pieces of the structured portfolio. And we have all that information there on the website. I know it can be overwhelming, so certainly if you need to submit questions to me, whatever needs to happen to make sure it's clear, that would be fantastic as well, of course. A couple of FAQs just to make sure that I covered all of them. I mentioned that CHSE-A, when you're applying for that, it's a separate process. It does not count for your CHSE renewal. So just make sure we're clear on that. You do not have to be an SSH member to apply. Of course, we're going to encourage that, but we know you're probably a member of lots of other wonderful organizations. That's great too. But if you don't have a home, we'd certainly love to have you here at SSH and take advantage of all the member benefits. is the $150 application fee that I mentioned earlier. Submission of the portfolio. Again, there's that online application that you have to go and complete all the elements that are there. Again, we recommend that you take that application worksheet and just complete all of it in the Word document format, and then just copy and paste over things like your narrative responses and so forth. But that's kind of what you're looking at there is you have the online application. You're going to request Dropbox or other means to submit your exemplar and your CV. Make sure your references are submitting their pieces as well. That's all the elements we're looking at. You'll notice on our webpage, there is the link to be able to submit your payment there. And the reference link is in the web handbook. It's listed on our website. Lots of different locations for you to find that. Again, just reiterating, there's 2 reviewers assigned plus a 3rd reviewer and then a panel as needed to ensure fair and thorough review. So I'm going to stop the recording here and we're going to go to questions now.